In this video I'm going to illustrate some of the display features that are useful when managing a peak model that is constructed from line shapes as we see here. There are three components to this peak model, two of which were created with respect to data, and that explains why we see a very good residual. This is only achieved if these two components that are constructed relative to data are adjusted in an intensity sense with respect to a baseline, and the baseline is a background type of 0. So when data are displayed by default, the display will go from the minimum to the maximum plus a little bit of the intensity of the data. So we would not see the peak model as we see here if we just use the default display options. And that's exactly what we see. I've double clicked on the BAMAS block, the default display options have been used, and so we no longer see the full peak model. Now one way of rectifying this is to use an option that is on the Sims toolbar, and when pressed the toolbar button enables an option which is on the tile display parameters dialog window, and it's on the y-axis property page, and it says 0 baseline on zoom. So this is now ticked. That was ticked by using this option here, and then I can rescale. And once I rescale the zoom, then because this is active, and you can see a black line at the bottom, that indicates that it will rescale to 0. This is typically used when you're using TOF Sims data. For XPS data, as I say, the default is to go to the minimum of the intensities. So the Sims option is useful when working with data such as these that have a peak model that involve a range of intensities that are added from 0. So that's one of the options. However, because these are XPS data, if you double click, the default is returned to the XPS default of from min intensity to maximum intensity of the data, because we have a rising background in XPS. So there's another option that we can use on the tile display parameters dialog window, and this one says auto scale range include BG, the background. So when I enable this tick box and then double click, the range now takes account of the fact that we've got a background that is calculated from the data that is 0. So that on top of this we can add an offset background, the background shape that we chose, and the photo emission shape that we chose as a consequence of selecting this background shape. Now, in addition to these options, there are additional modes for these arrow keys here. So if I simply press, then it shrinks and then it raises up the intensity in terms of the scale. If on the other hand I hold the control key down, then what happens is the range goes in a negative sense, so you can get to see further below the 0 background. So if I don't hold the control key down, I'm raising up the scale, therefore pushing down the intensity that is displayed, so I get to see the spectrum as I might want to see it. And I can also make an additional adjustment by going to the decrease Y scale, so that will then raise up the data relative to the scale. But if I hold the control key down, then it shifts everything down. So these together can be used to adjust the display. So it's a combination of these two arrows and the control key, holding it down or not holding it down. This will require some experimentation, but it does allow you to adjust and produce a display that is compatible with working with the peak model such as the one we have here.